Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Richard, brilliant to have you here. And to start with, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Richard Bell. I'm an executive coach primarily, but have been an entrepreneur and various other things over the last few years. Long career, 30 plus years in banking technology, but the last 10 years has been very much portfolio based. Consult, coach, advise is the general theme, and that's across a spectrum of people from students, interns, graduates, right through to FTSE 200 senior executives.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard. And it sounds like your advising is less focused on tech. It's more about people, right?
It's a mix, actually.
Okay.
There's great contrast between coaching and mentoring. Coaching is nothing about my content. Mentoring is about my content. And we try to keep those two things separate, although you can use some good coaching when you're mentoring, but you don't start mentoring when you're coaching.
Yeah,
That
really.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I've often I've been curious about the difference between the two, actually, because I think mentoring doesn't get as much credit as it should compared to coaching. But that's another conversation. So
Absolutely.
let's choose a card from the Values Jam deck, and
Sure.
I'm going to tip out the cards to start. And then, how many piles of cards would you like me to make in front of me?
3.
Okay, so we're going for three. And pile one is on my left and pile three is on my right. So which number pile would you like?
Left.
Okay. And in this pile, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 cards. So a number between 1 and 14.
Lucky 7.
Lucky 7. Well, this happens quite frequently, Richard. But
Oh,
look,
does it? Oh no. Okay. Good. Good. Well, it was fate, wasn't it? So,
I mean, half of me doesn't believe in all of that sort of stuff, but this
no.
stuff happens too frequently now for
Yeah.
to be dismissed. So you've chosen entrepreneurship, and I think if you'd have asked me which card is most appropriate for Richard, this would have been on my shortlist. So there you go. First question: what does entrepreneurship mean, and what does it look, feel, and sound like?
I think starting with the last bit first, I would say it's about absolute freedom to be expressing yourself in a completely authentic way, free of the confines of corporate politics. For the most part, in my experience, people working in large corporates usually operate on a compromise agreement. Okay, so there's enough alignment with the corporate values to express your personal values, but every now and then you accept there might be some conflict. And to me, entrepreneurship is that complete freedom to be authentic, operate to your own beliefs and values. And at the point where they start to be bent out of shape, you either course correct or you make other decisions to remove yourself from something that you're not enjoying. So I think freedom is a big part of that. The key part, going back to the first part of the question, for me is about solving problems, and they have to be real problems. For me, they have to have an ethical kind of foundation to them. So I work very closely with a startup that's focused on helping young people gain financial literacy and help them navigate their world in their lives into a world of the reality that doesn't get taught at school. How do you manage your family? How do you manage your ambition, etc., etc. So for me, that's helping young people, and it actually started from the fact that the current government student loans don't actually cover all of the costs now associated to the maintenance side of living rather than the tuition. side, and therefore young people are being forced to either work longer to support themselves, or they end up borrowing money at eye-wateringly high rates of interest, because they don't have credit history. They have no there's no leniency from what we would call the quality lenders. So this startup set out to how could we change that, and we looked at future earning potentials becoming an underwriting characteristic for quality lenders. And so to me, that's great ethical. I'm not interested in creating apps that just simply take 4 seconds out of someone's day.
And it's interesting to hear your perspective there, because I can imagine a number of people either watching or listening to this, and when they saw the card entrepreneurship, I'm guessing that many people immediately went to the, oh, well, that's about making money, isn't it? And yet you've not really focused on that. And so I think your version is the kind of, if I can call it, the modern version of entrepreneurship, with this social element in there, rather than the more traditional set up your own business, make yourself some money, that kind of approach.
Yeah, I think that's probably a stage in life thing for me. I'm at a point where the things that I do have to have that strong values and underlying benefit for people. But however, the tension of financially getting that business right is important fuel for the business. So if it doesn't have that tension, it could get very floppy and loose very quickly. But knowing that you need to have an investment round to take it to the next level, it absolutely, gives us some really strong momentum. So I'm not saying that stuff's not important, but to me, the purpose and the authenticity of operating within that purpose is probably more important to me than money.
Yeah. And how, so that being your personal perspective, I'm thinking now about a young person who is totally disillusioned with a corporate environment that they're in. And one of their friends says to them, why don't you set up a pop-up restaurant business? And they're like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to do that. So if they came to you for advice, where would you start with somebody like that who perhaps wasn't considering those deeper emotional values and purpose-based stuff, and was more about, I think this can earn me a living?
Yeah, and interestingly, I've actually had that use case, so I can draw on something very specific. So a lady that I coached, who was an intern then graduate within a bank, in one of our meetings said that her fiance, or fiance to be at the time, had graduated and gone on to a graduate program with one of the top 5 accounting consult businesses. And he was going through his accountancy exams, and it's very ruthless that you get to do a retake if you fail one of those exams, and you only get to do the retake if you were within 5% of the pass line. But if you fail on the second attempt and you fail any module, your graduate program is over. And that's what happened to this guy. And so I was asked if I would have a coaching meeting with him. And the first thing I like to explore is, where is your passion? And the passion was absolutely a culinary passion. And we then get into, well, logistically, how realistic is it that you can simply follow your passion through life? And his partner was obviously working in the financial services industry. Therefore, there was a bit of wiggle room to be able to accommodate one of them being more entrepreneurial than the other, from a bottom half of the Maslow triangle security perspective. And he followed that right through to the point where they were selected to take part in a TV program following 10 entrepreneurial pop-up food businesses. So absolutely, he learned a huge amount. The pivot after all of that was this in itself wasn't a business, but with my accounting skills, still to be fully accredited, how do we bring those two worlds together to a place where actually you could be working in the world of food, but you might be, chief accountant for Gordon Ramsay rather than running a pop up. So I think having a linkage to passion is very important. Coached another guy, worked for a major consulting house, but in his spare time was an Iron Man. He's now a board director of Adidas in Germany because we brought the two things together. So I think if you have passion, it would be a real shame not to explore whether there's an entire lifestyle that can some way be hooked into that passion.
Yeah, but with a healthy dose of realism chucked in there
Absolutely.
as well, right?
Absolutely. If you've got two young kiddies to feed and you're paying a big mortgage and all the rest of it, sometimes we have to place our passion slightly to one side, but we don't write it off. We just get a better sense about when I'm going to reconnect with that, or how can I remain relevant in that space, but without it affecting my, financial security or career building skills.
Does timing ever come into those conversations, Richard? Because it strikes me also that, you just gave that example of where you've got a mortgage to pay and this is your situation. But sometimes it feels to me like people dismiss something that they're passionate about forever rather than keeping it on the back burner and realizing that that's something that I'm going to come back to one day when this is the situation.
Yeah, and there tends to be now in young careers a lot more pivot points than probably you and I had. I did 34 years working for the same bank, and it was fulfilling in different ways. But I work with a lot of people who are in career transitions. And so it really doesn't matter whether you're 25, 30, 45, 50, it's still a transition. The first question always is this a threat or an opportunity? Okay. And I've not really thought about it like that. Is it problem solving or is it, panic? Right? Well, it's problem solving. Okay, so it's great. It's problem solving. Let's take a look at the spectrum of opportunity. It could be you're going to do something very similar than you were just doing. That would be the quickest, lowest risk into your next job. Or it could be something slightly adjacent, similar, reusable skills. But then I get them to go over to the abstract side of the house and go, what did you always want to be when you were growing up? And they go, I always wanted to be a zookeeper. And I've had that conversation. And as a lady who is a fully qualified accountant, who now works for the London Zoological Society. Yeah. Okay, so look at the abstract. Does the abstract meet your security needs, or can you somehow embrace the abstract in the things that you do need to achieve security? So I think every time we have one of those pivot points is a great time to pull down the box, core, adjacent, abstract.
Yeah, yeah. And listening to you makes me wonder about you just described, your career where you were with an organization for that length of time. That's increasingly rare, right? That
yes,
people do that.
Absolutely.
And so it feels also that entrepreneurship is probably something more relevant for more people at different stages in their lives now compared to what it used to be, where the stereotypical entrepreneur, was the young person who shied away from the corporate world and went out on their own, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make my own business. Whereas now people like you and I, say, coming to the end of their corporate careers, they're equally able to make decisions about going into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and with those ideas that we have, I don't think there is no age limit on expressing yourself through being an entrepreneur. The only thing that might be different is the level of risk might be lower later down the road, and therefore you can move into it without, giving yourself too much stress. There's always stress when you're starting something new. So I think there's some mitigation to that. But the most successful startups I've seen is where there is a blend of some seasoned campaigners, with some of that, high energy, young, looking at the next, best thing to come down the pipeline. So, I think you need both, right? To remain grounded.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you just reminded me, I seem to remember that Colonel Sanders, when he created Kentucky Fried Chicken, was in his 80s and he was declined by over 200 potential investors
Yeah,
before somebody said, yeah, go. I've always thought that was a brilliant lesson for any entrepreneur, irrespective of what age.
yeah, yeah. I think it's at the point where the calling is strong enough to go and express yourself, and I think that can be at any time. And your intentions might be different. A lot of young people who would go into that space and go all in at a very early stage are very much focused, usually on building something that's going to be sold within 5 years, to then unlock the next entrepreneurial experience that they want to have, and to build an entire career through a pyramid of entrepreneurial activity, which is terrific. I think it's terrific as long as their values and passion aligned.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting, and that, we're talking gross generalization here, so excuse that, but it strikes me that the younger generations today do have a greater social conscience than, say, our generation had at the same age. And so,
Definitely.
what you were talking there about the create something 5 years on, sell it, make a load of money kind of thing. I wonder if that will be reduced actually, to those sort of businesses that are wanting to create good in the world, because that's how those younger generations tend to think more like.
Yeah, and I think you can do both.
Yeah.
By saying something is values led and tied to your beliefs, etc., doesn't mean to say it's not a sound business proposition.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely do both. And the two young guys that I'm working with on that, young people, financial literacy. So they were both masters students. They haven't done the corporate jobs at all, and they've gone straight into that space, and they have a timeline as to take the business to a certain value and sell it, only because it enables them then to go and solve three new problems rather than just one. So they are on a mission to, make things better for people in certain sectors and fields.
So that sounds like it's blurring the lines between the private sector and what we call the third sector, or charities, for instance, where more businesses now are proving that you can actually make money and do good at the same time, rather than regard them as totally separate.
Yeah, I think sometimes the challenge that charities get is that dynamism. You're collecting in money for a great cause, but everyone's always just wanting to be certain as much of what gets donated finds its way to the right place. And interestingly, your card says entrepreneur, but I think intrapreneurs are just as important as entrepreneurs. So we try to foster now, and a lot of large organisations in the world of innovation is imbibing an entrepreneurial culture. So we want people to express themselves. We want them to go and pursue ideas outside the box of a job description.
Yeah.
Be an entrepreneur first, and then become an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I relate to that because I didn't realize, but that's what I was when I worked in corporate organizations. I was always attracted to the role that was sorting out a mess that nobody else wanted to do.
Exactly.
Partly it was about wanting to solve problems, but I think I probably have to admit that the other part of it was if somebody had made a mess, you couldn't really do worse than that. So you were onto a winner, It was
There's a little bit of that because back at the bottom half of the Maslow's triangle, it's nice to know you're not being set up to fail
yeah,
because you can see a way of making that thing better than when you found it, which played to one of the key values that I really liked in corporate life was stewardship, which was about taking something over for a period of time and leaving it better than you found it. I think that's a beautiful value, and I continue to use that value myself. If I don't think I can make it better, then I'm probably going to leave it well alone, right? Whether that's an entrepreneurial thing or advisory or consulting or what have you.
that's a wise thought actually, because I suspect that many people don't give that much or as much consideration as they either could or slash should.
But to your point, if something's presented to you where you feel you have an opportunity to make it better, then you're going to find it. Like you, that's a nice feeling to start with. But for me, is I feel like I can almost paint my own story for this area.
Yeah.
And my imagination, my creativity, my entrepreneurial thoughts. I could push the boundary on one or two things that haven't been pushed for a long time.
Yeah.
If you can strengthen those muscles in an entrepreneurial environment, you're setting yourself up very nicely for an entrepreneurial chapter.
Yeah, so that's a really good segue into another question then, which we're going to take the reverse of what we've just been talking about, and I'd like to know, where have you noticed a lack of entrepreneurship?
I kind of feel that's something that's sometimes feels like it's all around us. Okay, so whenever we're filling in a form or following a process that doesn't seem to make any sense, you just get this feeling that someone really didn't bring a great deal of imagination or creativity to bear, right? And sometimes processes are designed to be awkward because people almost want to discourage people to follow a process that could end up with a cost for them. So they can be purposely clunky. But generally, something can scream out very quickly. I think, particularly, I don't know where to say it, but almost like the government kinds of things where you just feel someone could have reinvented that by now. Why is it that I can't go into a GP in Edinburgh and they can literally just pull up my file from my GP in London? And that's because it doesn't work like that. And so I'm always, coming across opportunities. But, some sectors of our life do not have the same kind of investment capital and the ability to move at pace to embrace everything that new that comes along. And the difference between the large institutions, the banks, that we've worked for along the way, they're a bit like the oil tankers. They take 6 hours to slow down and change course. Whereas if you're working in a scaling startup business, you can pivot pretty much on a 2 pence piece into course correction. So it doesn't mean to say that bad people or bad things. It's just some situations in life lend themselves less, I think, to that entrepreneurial agility and continuous adaptivity that I think we've all become accustomed now to expect. You're constantly getting something on your phone saying there's an app upgrade tonight. It's got these features on it, but some things in life just don't have that same agility.
And I think it's amazing how easily people kind of fall into line in those environments.
Yeah.
So, if you take the startup environment, it's basically we can do what we want and we don't care kind of approach, and maybe making some massive mistakes by that. And then if you mentioned banks, oh well, we're highly regulated, that's why we have to do.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not exactly the reason, but you choose to draw on it.
Yeah.
You reminded me of I had an issue with my bank a few years ago when they failed to pay a supplier of mine in the US on time, in good time. And it was very embarrassing. And so I wanted to make a complaint. And it took forever to get through this complaint process. And
Yes.
there's a quote that I will never forget, and I use it when I'm doing work with in the customer experience space now. I was on the phone and I said, "Can I speak to the head of customer experience or equivalent? We don't
Yes.
have that role. Okay, can I speak to somebody senior that is responsible for the customer experience?" And they said, "Our senior people in that area don't speak to customers," which which
The irony.
is classic. And
Yeah. I
the
think there's. Sorry, apologies, Alan.
I was just going to finish off the way that ended up. I think they ended up paying something like more than £1,000 when I would have been very happy right at the beginning of the process for somebody to call me and say, "Sorry, we messed up, Alan. We're going to get it sorted out, and I'm going to send you a case of wine." You know, it just
Yes. Yeah.
needn't have
It's
cost
so
me that time
easy,
and
isn't it?
money.
To do the right.
Yeah,
Easy to do the right. But generally, it's poor process that prohibits people from doing the right thing.
go on, say a bit more.
It's not my gift to make that gift to you, even though I know it's the right thing. And I think there's another really important thing I've been looking at for the last 3 or 4 years. I work with a guy that I coach who is the chief innovation officer for a large organization. And one of the things that he's most proud of in what he's created is this ideation engine. And so many years ago, we used to talk about the staff suggestion schemes. But what he's created is an entire platform that's endemic across the entire organization, where anybody, in it having encountered a poor piece of process, can record exactly where in an end-to-end process this was going wrong, what the implication was to the customer and the organization. And nothing's lost because once it's been input, it's tracked. Okay. And what we're seeing is a large percentage of good ideas at the sharp end getting translated into solutions. But you have to invest in that ideation platform. And the first investment is a change in culture, that there are people in the other people in the organization who may have a better view.
Wow. And what you're making me think there, that what he's done is effectively taken the ownership of process away from the organization and given it to the people that work in the organization. Yeah.
The whole mantra of enterprise agility is that people should be able to make decisions autonomously,
Yeah.
as long as they're to the strategy of the firm. So if I see something's not working properly, then I should absolutely be empowered to go and fix that, knowing that it leads the firm to where it wants to be in 3 or 5 years' time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How liberating that must feel to work,
Yeah.
because instead of, "Oh, I've got to adhere to this process," and moaning about it and having that vibe, it's more about, I'm part of this process. And if I see that there's something that can be improved, I can just go ahead and do that.
And for the most part, they're not expensive things.
Yeah.
It could be the smallest configuration change in a piece of code in a piece of software.
Yeah.
Could just go in tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that point, actually, so I was on a call the other day, not the other day, it was a few months ago, probably. Octopus Energy, I give them a shout out for this. So the way that they work is that their systems and software people come and sit with a call handler. So when they're working live on a customer call,
Yes.
and the back room guys are basically sat there, and the example that was given was, "Oh, I noticed that you did this. I could do a workaround so that you only have to press one instead of three things." So it was like really the right way round in terms of
Yeah,
enabling the
yeah,
business rather than the back room, designing it in isolation in a dark room, dumping it on the operation, and then the two having a fight about whether
yeah,
it's appropriate or not.
yeah. And we're going full circle here, right back to the start of this entrepreneurial piece is that whether you've got a good business idea, you've got a mission, why you're setting out to do what you're going to do. Does it have a commercial framework to it? Can it make money? But most importantly, who derives value from existing? Both customers and the firm itself you're creating. Once you've got those three things lined up, there are two other parts of the model. Think of the Olympic rings. The bottom two Olympic rings are the operating model, so the culmination of all of those processes, whether it's client journey or product journey, and then you have a transformation model. And all the time, the transform model is becoming the new op model. It's a continuous process of iteration. And the world we live in now means it's almost a blur of
Yep.
continuous transformation. Okay. So we want people to be able to identify value enhancing small things that we can adjust and course correct on very quickly. And if later down the road there's more data that says actually that configuration can change again because nothing stays static forever, what we've really done is created a culture that says you're as important as anyone else in spotting something that could be done better.
I love what you said there about the blur, because of the exponential pace of change, it strikes me that this staged approach to improvement just is no longer fit for purpose, right? So it has to be this continuous, ongoing thing. So there's no such thing anymore of, oh, this is where we're at right now, and that's where we're going to be then. It's more about it being this blur that you describe on an ongoing basis and having a handle on how where exactly we are, but understanding that we're never standing still, and then where we want to get towards rather
Yeah,
than a definitive point.
that's the distinction. So what I'm describing sounds almost a bit utopian. Well, can a business run like that? No, the business still has to have goals and it has to have a direction of travel.
Yeah.
But the exact moment when those goals will be achieved is never known.
Yeah.
They're always a place we're moving towards. So along the way, whenever we see an opportunity to enhance the client experience or the speed at which we can modify a product, then we need to be highly adaptive. High level and high speed adaptivity is achieved through more people in the organization understanding the strategy and goals of the firm. If you're empowered with that knowledge, you can make contextually based small changes without causing disruption.
Yeah, dead right.
Yeah.
I think that really strong statement is actually a good time for us to move towards closing today's Values
Yes.
Jam. And the question is always the same. And it is for today, it's what are you encouraged to do differently about entrepreneurship as a result of our conversation?
Do differently. I can't think of nothing's leaping immediately at me. I'm fairly well rooted, but I think possibly being even more encouraging of people to explore their entrepreneurial. I think everyone has an entrepreneurial thread in them, and it's just a question of whether we choose to embrace it or ignore it. And I still believe that within the catalogue of work of a lifetime, doing something that you can lead with your authenticity will give you a huge amount of positive reflection later in life. And I go on a lot of cruises, and I talk to people. When I very first started cruising, and I find myself sitting on a shared dinner table with lots of older people, I'm thinking, well, this could be a tough conversation. And then I started finding that they always start off with, well, I used to be. And then I started saying, so you're not now? you stopped. Well, I've not stopped following the markets, or I haven't stopped doing that and all the rest of it. I just don't operationally. So you still are then. And I met a lady. Let me know if I'm going off piece here, but I met a lady on a cruise who was on a mobility scooter and ended up on a table next to me in an outside cafe, and I started a bit of a chat with her, and it turned out that she was the UK figure skating champion in 1976.
Right.
And I realised I had already started to form a judgment about that person. So I think don't ever get to the situation that you say, I used to be. Get to the point where you can say, there was this time in my life when I made something happen.
Right. And that point about entrepreneurship, again, seems more relevant now than ever before because of the situation that we're in, where static organizations, operating environments are no longer the case. And that was when you used to be able to rely on, well, there's a process manual or whatever, and that remains as it is for 5 years. Whereas now it's your blur.
Yes.
For me, I'm gonna. Does the name Dan Pallotta mean anything to you?
It rings a bell, and I couldn't tell you why.
Okay, so he has a TED talk where he talks about how he thinks we've got charity all wrong.
Okay. Yes.
So one of the examples he gives is that we begrudge paying the CEO of a charity that does good in the world a reasonable sum of money, but we don't complain about a CEO of a tobacco company being paid an absolute fortune to damage the world. And what is all that about?
Yeah. Yes.
So I think you'll enjoy that in light of what you were saying about entrepreneurship and particularly related to that charity sector. And is there anything else?
And I think there's another thing as well. Sometimes this is a bit controversial, but some involvement with people, with charities, is almost like a carbon offset. So I've done good things in my life because I give money, but I think let's measure the actions rather than the donations.
Yeah, and that's something else that he touches on, and I think you kind of inferred it. It was about, oh well, we just want to get some money in and then give as much of it as we can to a good cause, instead of how could we invest this money to create the maximum value for this good cause?
Exactly, and you see in the children in need and those sorts of things. Lots of those things are about stuff. Prince's Trust is another fine example, isn't it, of creating a framework that actually exponentially increases the chance of young people being successful. So, sometimes there's just a need to go and buy a piece of equipment in a charity or get a water pump set up or whatever it might be. But the most important things are really creating the frameworks and solutions that enable that area to become self-sufficient in being able to overcome those problems in perpetuity.
Yeah. So I guess I want to close this conversation by thanking you for choosing the card, because I can't imagine many more people that would be able to speak with so much informed expertise about the topic of entrepreneurship. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks.